Welcome back to the Motivated Mind Zone. Glad to have you here.
And it's great to be back. Today, we're really diving deep into something quite challenging but incredibly rewarding.
Absolutely. We're moving beyond just understanding vocabulary. Our goal today is achieving true academic fluency.
Exactly. It's for anyone who's felt, they get the basic idea of a research topic, but maybe struggle with the really high level critique or discussion. That's where we're headed.
Right? That jump from passive recognition to actively operating within those scholarly conversations. That's the C1 level sweet spot we're aiming for. It's about building that toolkit, isn't it?
It really is. The toolkit you need to, say, read a complex journal article and not just get the gist, but really analyze its methods, its claims, its rigor
Mm.
surgically, as you put it.
And to do that, we've pulled together, over 30 key C1 level terms,
Yeah.
all focused specifically on academic and scientific research.
That's right. And these aren't just, random words. Think of them as the linguistic bridges, maybe. They connect the raw data, the complex methodologies, and the big theoretical ideas.
I like that linguistic bridges because that's what they do. They structure the knowledge. If you have the data points, these words help build the actual argument.
Precisely. And mastering them gives you real precision, real power. You gain the ability to genuinely critique a paper, not just summarize it, or structure your own advanced report properly.
Or even lead professional discussions on new findings with confidence without resorting to kind of vague language.
Spot on. So to make this manageable, we've structured it logically, following the typical life cycle of a research project.
Okay, so what's the roadmap?
First, we'll tackle the foundational language, the core ideas like theory versus evidence, the absolute basics.
And section 2.
We'll get into defining the research approach. This is critical methodology versus methods, quantitative versus qualitative data, really understanding the how.
Okay, makes sense. Then part 3.
Part 3 takes us, inside the lab, metaphorically speaking, execution. We look at the tools, the subjects, the controls, the practical side.
And fine.
We close the loop with the academic cycle itself. Validation, reporting the findings, and importantly, critique and getting the word out, dissemination.
Sounds comprehensive.
Right.
Let's jump into section 1, the foundational language of inquiry.
Okay. Let's start with a word that often appears early on, managing expectations. Preliminary.
Ah, yes. Preliminary. When researchers use this, what are they signaling? What's the intellectual fine print, if you will?
It's essentially a status update. It means initial, preparatory, maybe introductory. The researchers being transparent, saying, look, these are early trends, maybe first hints.
We don't bet the farm on them yet?
Exactly. They haven't gone through the full, rigorous, final analysis and verification. It's not the final word.
So if I see a headline about a new study, and that word preliminary is tucked away in the details,
Yeah.
my critical thinking needs to kick in. It's interesting, maybe promising, but not definitive.
Absolutely. You shouldn't treat it as a solid conclusion ready for, say, major policy changes or big investments. It guides the next steps in research.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about a pharmaceutical company. They might share preliminary data from a very early phase 1 drug trial. Maybe it shows the drug seems safe in a small group.
Okay.
That might get investors interested. But everyone involved knows those findings must be confirmed later in much larger, more controlled phase 3 trials before the drug gets approved. The preliminary result is just a first step.
And the danger, I suppose, especially for us as learners consuming information, is when that preliminary nature gets lost in translation, like in media reports.
That's a huge risk. Those early results get stripped of the caveats, reported almost as fact. You see a preliminary survey suggesting, I don't know, public support for some idea.
Right.
It might be useful for testing the waters, but if a government suddenly tried to implement a massive change based only on that preliminary data, well, that would be ignoring the necessary scientific rigor.
So preliminary is a direct signal about the confidence level we should have at that specific point.
Precisely. It's a martyr of caution.
Okay. Moving from the status to the actual substance. Research often gets framed by this fundamental tension, doesn't it, between empirical work and theoretical work. Let's unpack empirical first. Sounds like the bedrock.
It often is. Empirical findings are conclusions based directly on observation, experiments, or evidence collected from the real world. It's about data you gather through your senses or instruments interacting with reality.
So it's not just abstract thinking. It implies getting your hands dirty, scientifically speaking, designing a test, gathering data, measuring something tangible.
Exactly. It demands that real-world engagement. Think about medicine again. You might have a really clever theoretical idea about how a disease works.
Makes logical sense on paper.
Right. But it's essentially meaningless in practice without empirical data from clinical trials showing it actually has a measurable, repeatable effect in people or animals.
So when someone asks for evidence, they usually mean empirical evidence.
Almost always. They want findings from studies, observations, experiments. Synonyms like observational, evidence-based, or even testable capture that idea of real-world grounding.
Okay, so that's the concrete side. What about the other pole? Theoretical inquiry.
Mhm.
When research is purely conceptual.
Theoretical inquiry is built on conceptual models, logical reasoning, mathematical frameworks. It often comes before the practical, real-world testing. It's about building the intellectual structure.
Physics seems like a prime example.
Wow.
High-energy physics, cosmology.
Absolutely. Researchers build these incredibly complex theoretical models to predict things they haven't observed yet, like gravitational waves before they were detected or new particles.
Or maybe in economics, building a model of market behavior based on assumptions.
Exactly. A purely theoretical model of, say, how interest rate changes should affect inflation based on equations and assumptions about how people behave rationally. The logic might be sound internally.
But it's still a model, an abstraction.
Yeah.
Hypothetical, abstract, those seem like good synonyms here.
They are. And this brings us to that crucial tension you mentioned. Theory is vital. It asks the questions, provides the framework,
But it usually needs empirical validation to become accepted as, well, fact, right? What happens when the real-world data doesn't fit the beautiful theory?
that's where science really happens. That tension drives progress. If you have an established theoretical model, maybe an economic theory, and you test it with new, massive empirical data sets,
And the data consistently goes against the model's predictions.
then the theory has to be revised, or maybe even thrown out completely. It shows the model wasn't capturing reality accurately enough.
We've seen this play out with the replication crisis in some fields, haven't we? Where famous theoretical papers based on earlier empirical work couldn't actually be replicated later.
That's a perfect, sophisticated example. It shows that even theories seemingly built on evidence can crumble when tested again, with maybe better methods or larger samples. Theory proposes the map.
And empirical work is like the GPS constantly checking the map against the actual ground.
Beautifully put. A healthy scientific field needs both, constantly challenging each other.
Okay, so whether it starts with theory or observation, all this work, the discussion, the publication, the arguments, it happens within a specific context we call scholarly discourse. What does that term signify?
Scholarly discourse refers to that serious, high-level academic study and intellectual conversation carried out by recognized experts in a field. Using the term signals adherence to certain standards.
Standards of rigor, precision, evidence.
Exactly. And it's not just a casual chat. It's maintained through formal structures. Think scholarly journals.
Right, they act as gatekeepers.
They absolutely do. They uphold standards through process like peer review. We'll get to that later. And scholarly conferences aren't just for networking either.
They're arenas for defending ideas.
Precisely. Presenting your work, facing tough questions from peers, getting immediate feedback and critique. The word scholarly itself implies that the work has met a certain recognized level of quality and seriousness. It's passed a bar.
Okay, that sets the stage nicely. Let's move into section 2. Defining the research approach. We have an idea, maybe a theory or an observation. How do we actually structure the investigation? And you mentioned a key distinction first. Methodology.
Yes, this one trips people up all the time, even native speakers. It's crucial for advanced understanding. People often use methodology when they just mean methods.
So what's the difference? Methods are the tools.
Methods are the specific tools, yes. Like conducting surveys, running statistical tests, doing interviews, analyzing historical documents, the concrete actions.
Okay. But methodology is bigger than that.
Much bigger. Methodology is the whole system. It's the overall strategy, the series of procedures, and this is key, the underlying philosophical rationale that justifies why you chose those specific methods.
Ah, the why. Not just what tools you use, but why those tools were the right ones for this particular research question.
Exactly. So if you're critiquing a research paper at a C1 level, you don't just list their methods, you analyze their methodology. Why did they opt for, say, a quantitative survey instead of qualitative interviews? Why a longitudinal study over decades versus a quick cross-sectional snapshot?
You're questioning the fundamental logic of their research design.
Precisely. And in a formal paper, the methodology section has to be incredibly detailed and persuasively argued. Because if the reasoning behind the approach is flawed,
Then everything that follows is built on shaky ground.
yeah,
The house built on sand idea.
exactly. No matter how fancy the statistical analysis looks later, if the methodological foundation is weak, the results are unreliable. That's why you, as an advanced learner, need to scrutinize the methodology first.
And is that why researchers sometimes use a mixed methodology, combining different approaches?
Often, yes, it can be a very robust approach. Combining, say, quantitative and qualitative methods can help triangulate findings. Leveraging the strengths of each and mitigating the weaknesses of using just one, it gives a fuller picture.
Right. Which leads us perfectly into classifying the data itself. Quantitative versus qualitative. This seems fundamental to the methodology choice.
Absolutely fundamental. Quantitative data is all about numbers, measurement, statistics, things you can count or measure objectively. Amounts, frequencies, scores.
And the goal here is usually breadth, generalizing findings.
Often, yes. Think big surveys, maybe 10,000 people trying to find patterns or correlations that apply to a whole population. The analysis relies heavily on statistical software, looking for mathematical relationships and statistical significance.
Statistical significance meaning the likelihood the result isn't just random chance.
Essentially, yes. Is the observed effect mathematically robust? Think large-scale health studies, economic modeling, opinion polls. Numerical, statistical ACE, those are the key words.
Okay, now contrast that with qualitative data.
Qualitative focuses on, well, quality, the nature, the characteristics of something. It's descriptive, rich in context, focusing on depth rather than breadth.
So instead of surveying thousands, you might,
Conduct really in-depth, long interviews with maybe, say, 20 people. Or observe a particular situation closely over time. You're looking for themes, narrative, understanding the lived experience.
and the analysis isn't running numbers, it's interpreting meanings.
Exactly. Synthesizing complex descriptions, identifying patterns in language or behavior, it gives you the why behind the numbers.
And you can see again how powerful a mixed methodology could be. The quantitative tells you what's happening on a large scale.
And the qualitative gives you the rich human context, the stories, the reasons why it might be happening. That combination can be incredibly insightful.
Definitely. Okay, so whether we're collecting numbers or stories, we need rules for the investigation. This is where parameters come in, right? Setting the boundaries.
Yes. In a research context, a parameter is a strict limit, a boundary or a criterion that controls how something is done or measured. It sets the fixed rules of the game for that specific study.
So these aren't just suggestions, they're hard limits to ensure consistency.
Exactly. They ensure control and comparability. For instance, in a complex computer simulation, maybe climate modeling, the researchers must set very specific parameters for the variables.
Like temperature ranges or the time period the simulation covered.
Exactly. Or input pressure, maybe chemical concentrations. If an input variable goes outside the predefined parameters, the model might become unstable or the results meaningless for the question asked. Or in human studies, ethical parameters define acceptable conduct.
It's about controlling the conditions rigorously.
Yeah.
And speaking of control, especially when dealing with people or complex systems where hidden factors might influence the results, researchers often rely on randomization. What's that about?
Randomization is the deliberate process of assigning subjects or treatments or even data points, in some cases purely by chance, using strict statistical
It
methods.
seems almost counterintuitive, doesn't it? Leaving things to chance in the scientific study. What's the goal?
The goal is crucial to achieve unbiased results. It aims to neutralize the effect of underlying factors, both those you know about and, critically, those you don't even realize might be skewing the findings.
How does it do that?
Well, imagine you're testing a new teaching method. If you just let enthusiastic teachers volunteer for the new method, they might get better results simply because they're more motivated, not because the method itself is better.
Okay.
But if you randomly assign students or classrooms to either the new method or the standard method, you ensure that, on average, factors like prior ability, motivation, socioeconomic background, even unknown factors are distributed roughly evenly between the two groups.
So it makes the groups comparable at the start, statistically equivalent.
Exactly. Which means if you do see a significant difference in outcomes later, you can be much more confident that the difference is actually due to the method itself, the thing you intentionally varied, and not some pre-existing difference between the groups.
That makes sense. It's fundamental for establishing cause and effect, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's why randomized controlled trials, especially double-blind ones, where neither subjects nor researchers know who gets what, are considered the gold standard for testing interventions. Chance assignment or random allocation are other ways to phrase it.
Got it. Okay. That lays the groundwork for the approach. Let's move into section 3. Inside the lab execution and tools. We've got the plan. Now we're actually doing the research. Often this involves an experimental approach.
Right. The experimental approach specifically refers to studies designed around conducting scientific experiments. The core idea is usually to test a hypothesis, often about cause and effect, or to measure how effective an intervention is.
And it requires really careful planning to control variables.
Meticulous planning. That control is the hallmark of the experimental method.
Now, you can't run experiments without tools, which brings us to the term apparatus.
Yes, apparatus is the collective term for the equipment, the machinery, maybe a complex setup of instruments used for a specific technical or scientific purpose. It can be anything from glassware in a chemistry lab to a particle accelerator.
And the quality of the apparatus is critical, isn't it, if the tools are faulty?
The results are compromised, fundamentally. The reliability, the accuracy, the calibration of the apparatus directly impacts the trustworthiness of the findings.
So advanced reporting requires more than just listing the equipment used.
Oh, absolutely. Rigorous scientific papers must be transparent about the tools. They should ideally mention the precision limits, the error tolerance of the instruments. If an effect you're measuring is very small, close to the detection limit of your apparatus.
That needs to be stated clearly as a
Yeah.
potential limitation.
Exactly. And if something went wrong, say an instrument malfunctioned briefly, a good report acknowledges it transparently and explains how it was handled, maybe through statistical correction or excluding certain data points.
It's about honesty regarding the tools. Equipment or device are simpler words, but apparatus often captures that sense of a complex, integrated setup.
That's a good distinction.
Yeah.
Now, one of the most tightly controlled types of experiment, particularly with humans, is the clinical trial.
Right. We hear about these all the time with new medicines.
A clinical trial is a very specific type of controlled experiment designed to evaluate both the effectiveness and the safety of a medical intervention. A drug, a vaccine, a surgical technique in human volunteers. They follow strict, predefined phases and protocols.
And the people participating are formally called subjects. What does that term imply?
Subject is the standard, formal term for the individual entity, person, animal, sometimes even an object being studied or observed. Using this formal term immediately signals that rigorous ethical and procedural protocols are being followed, especially in human research.
There's also that informal term, guinea pig. Where does that fit?
Guinea pig is informal, definitely not for scientific reports. It carries a connotation of risk of being experimented on, perhaps with something untested or unproven. People might use it half-jokingly for volunteers in early-phase trials of very novel treatments, or even metaphorically for early adopters of new tech or fads.
Okay, so stick to subject and formal contexts. Now, for a clinical trial or many experiments, to actually work to isolate the effect you're testing, you absolutely need a control group.
Essential. Non-negotiable for strong causal claims. The control group serves as the baseline, the standard for comparison. They typically receive a placebo, an inactive substance or sham procedure, designed to look identical to the real treatment.
While the other group, the experimental group, gets the actual active treatment.
Correct. And the reason this comparison is so critical is to isolate the treatment's effect from everything else that might be going on.
Like the placebo effect itself, just thinking you're getting treated can make you feel better, or natural recovery over time.
Exactly. The control group experiences the same environment, same schedule, same level of interaction with researchers. They get the psychological boost of being in a study too. So if the treatment group shows a significantly better outcome than the control group,
You have much stronger evidence that the treatment itself caused the difference, not those other confounding factors.
it's fundamental to the integrity and the statistical power of the results. Without that reliable comparison point, that baseline or reference group, you simply can't be sure what caused the outcome.
Makes sense. Now, sometimes the data we need isn't something we can easily measure externally. We need to know about people's internal states, feelings, opinions, past behaviors. This is where self-report comes in.
Yes, self-report methods involve the subjects themselves providing information about their own experiences, attitudes, feelings, symptoms, or behaviors. This is often done through questionnaires, surveys, interviews, or diaries.
It seems invaluable for capturing subjective experience, but it must come with challenges, right? Potential biases.
Huge challenges. The biggest one is probably social desirability bias. People tend to answer in ways they think are socially acceptable or make them look good rather than being completely honest, especially on sensitive topics.
And memory can be faulty too. Asking someone how often they exercised last month.
Exactly. Recall bias is a major issue. So good methodology using self-report has to acknowledge these limitations up front. Researchers try to mitigate them, maybe by guaranteeing anonymity, using carefully worded questions or framing questions neutrally.
Can they cross-check the self-report data?
Sometimes, yes. That's ideal. For example, comparing self-reported food intake diaries with actual biological markers, or self-reported screen time with data from a phone app. But often, for purely internal states like feelings, self-report is the only way. The key is transparency about its limitations.
Okay. Let's shift gears from the subjective to something very objective and time-based. Carbon dating. This comes up a lot in fields like archaeology.
Carbon dating, or more formally radiocarbon dating, is a specific technique used to determine the age of organic materials, things that were once living. It works by measuring the decay of a radioactive isotope of carbon, carbon-14, C14.
Right. C14 is absorbed by living things, and when they die, it starts to decay at a known constant rate, like a natural clock.
Exactly. By measuring the amount of C14 remaining in a sample relative to stable carbon isotopes, scientists can calculate how long ago the organism died.
But it's not foolproof, is it? There are limitations.
Definitely. For advanced understanding, you need to know the caveats. First, it's only generally reliable for materials up to about 50,000 years old. Beyond that, there's too little C14 left to measure accurately with standard methods.
And contamination is a big problem. If an ancient bone fragment gets contaminated with modern organic material.
Huge problem. Even tiny amounts of modern carbon can make an old sample appear much younger than it is. Careful collection and cleaning are essential. Also, the amount of C14 in the atmosphere hasn't always been constant.
Oh, right. So the clock hasn't always ticked at the same atmospheric rate?
Sort of. The decay rate is constant, but the starting amount varied. So raw C14 dates have to be calibrated using other chronological records, like tree rings, to convert them into actual calendar years. And there are other complexities, like the reservoir effect for marine samples. It requires careful interpretation.
Good to know. Okay, that brings us to section 4, the academic cycle. Validation, reporting, and critique. All the data's in, the analysis is done. What's next? Often, researchers look for connections, right? They see if variables correlate.
Yes. To correlate means that two or more variables show a statistical relationship, they tend to move together, or show similar patterns in the data.
Like, studies might show that income levels correlate with life expectancy. As one goes up, the other tends to go up.
That's a common example. It indicates a link, a connection. And this is probably the single most important distinction for any C1 level thinker engaging with research.
Correlation does not equal causation.
Say it loud, absolutely critical.
Yeah.
Just because two things are correlated, it does not automatically mean one causes the other.
We used the classic ice cream sales correlating with drowning rates example earlier, the hidden factor being hot weather causing both. Can you give another, maybe more academic example?
Sure. Imagine a study finds a strong correlation between children who regularly play video games, variable A, and lower scores on standardized tests, variable B.
Okay, the correlation is there in the data.
A naive interpretation might say, video games make kids do worse in school. But an advanced critique immediately asks, what about confounding variables?
Like maybe factors that lead to both more gaming and lower scores. Socioeconomic status, perhaps. Less parental supervision.
Yeah.
Pre-existing learning difficulties.
Exactly. Maybe variable C, e.g. lack of resources at home, causes both more gaming time and lower test performance. The video games themselves might not be the direct cause at all. To prove causation, you'd need a different kind of study, maybe an experiment controlling for those confounders. Disentangling correlation from causation is key.
Definitely. Okay, so once we have findings, maybe a correlation we think is meaningful, we need to validate them. First step, is the effect even detectable?
Detectable simply means that the effect, or the substance, or the change you're looking for is noticeable or measurable above the background noise or the limitations of your instruments.
It's about the threshold of measurement, like with the apparatus we discussed. If you're looking for a very faint signal,
It has to be reliably above the detection limit of your equipment. If a study claims to find traces of a chemical, but the levels are below the established detectable threshold for their method, you can't confidently say it's there. You can only say it wasn't detectable with that specific setup. Discernible or noticeable are similar ideas.
okay, so if something is detectable, the next crucial step is to verify it.
Yes. To verify means to confirm the truth or accuracy of something through careful examination and, crucially, further evidence. In science, this relies heavily on replication.
It's not enough for the original researchers to say, yep, we checked our results, they're right.
No. Verification demands more. Ideally, independent researchers using the same methods, or maybe even better ones, should be able to repeat the experiment or analysis and get the same or at least highly similar results.
That process of independent verification is what builds confidence in a finding, turning it from a single study's claim into accepted knowledge. Confirm, authenticate those, capture the essence.
Absolutely. And sometimes the process leads the other way. Instead of verifying, research might aim to disprove an existing idea.
To disprove means showing conclusively, with strong evidence, that a previously held belief or hypothesis is actually false.
Correct. And this isn't seen as failure in science, it's vital progress. Think about old scientific ideas that were widely accepted for centuries.
Like the idea that the Earth was the center of the universe, geocentric model.
Exactly. That was eventually disproved by accumulating empirical evidence and better theoretical models. A strong disproof acts as a scientific rebuttal. Refute or invalidate are powerful synonyms. This whole cycle of proposing, testing, verifying, and sometimes disproving is how knowledge advances.
And it's important because we need ways to distinguish reliable knowledge from, well, things that just sound scientific. Which brings us to pseudoscience.
Yes, a very important term for critical thinking today. Pseudoscience refers to claims, beliefs, or practices that are presented as being scientific, but they lack any actual empirical basis. They haven't been subjected to proper scientific testing and verification.
Or maybe they've been tested and consistently failed, but people keep promoting them anyway.
That too. Pseudoscience often uses jargon that sounds scientific, quantum energy fields or bioresonance frequencies, but it ignores actual scientific methodology, doesn't use proper control groups, isn't falsifiable, and avoids peer review.
It's like a costume of science without the substance. Astrology is a classic example, or maybe some extreme health fads with no verifiable evidence.
Exactly. Developing academic fluency, understanding terms like empirical, methodology, verification, it equips you to see through the jargon and recognize pseudoscience for what it is claims lacking credible evidence.
You mentioned spotting it based on methodological flaws, like seeing a claim based only on self-report with no control group. That's a huge red flag.
A massive red flag. That ability to critique the methodology is your shield against pseudoscience. Now, assuming the research is rigorous and verifiable, it needs to be reported formally. And structure is key here. Before writing, researchers immerse themselves in the literature.
The literature meaning? All the existing published work on the topic.
Precisely. The entire body of existing scholarly writing, journal articles, books, conference papers relevant to their specific area of research. Reviewing the literature is step one.
Why is it so crucial?
Several reasons. To understand what's already known, to avoid reinventing the wheel, to refine your own research question by identifying gaps in the existing knowledge, and to place your own work within the ongoing scholarly conversation. You need to know the background.
Okay, so once the research is done, and it's maybe a very substantial piece of work, it might be published as a treatise.
A treatise is a specific kind of publication. It usually implies a long, very formal, incredibly detailed written work exploring a single subject in great depth. Think of major foundational books in a field. It signals a really comprehensive, authoritative contribution.
But whether it's a treatise or a shorter article, any piece of academic writing is built around its core argument, its thesis.
Absolutely. The thesis is the main point, the central claim or proposition that the entire paper or book is designed to argue for and support with evidence. It's the anchor.
And often, especially for, say, a PhD, you have to literally defend that thesis orally.
Yes, the thesis defense is a common requirement. You present your central argument and evidence, and a committee of experts grills you on its validity, methodology, and contribution.
Now, because academic papers can be long and dense, there's a vital tool for quickly understanding what they're about: the abstract.
The abstract is that short summary, usually just 150, 300 words, right at the beginning of the paper. Its job is to concisely state the research question, the methodology used, the key findings, and the main conclusion.
It's like the movie trailer for the research paper, helping readers decide if they need to read the whole thing.
It gets like that. It's an essential filtering tool for busy researchers trying to stay on top of the literature. You scan the abstract to gauge relevance.
And underpinning all this formal writing, giving credit where it's due, is proper citation.
Non-negotiable. A citation is the formal reference to a source acknowledging where an idea, a piece of data, a quote, or even a concept came from. It's fundamental for intellectual honesty, avoiding plagiarism.
And it allows readers to track down the original sources themselves, right? To verify your claims.
Crucially, yes. It makes the web of knowledge traceable. And citations have to follow specific style parameters like APA, MLA, Chicago, ensuring consistency and clarity for the reader.
We talked about honesty regarding the apparatus. It's also vital when discussing the study's own weaknesses, isn't it? Acknowledging limitations.
Yes, this is a hallmark of rigorous research and reporting. Limitations are the inherent constraints, weaknesses, or restrictions in a study's design, methods, sample, or scope that might affect how the results should be interpreted or generalized.
But isn't it counterintuitive? Why would researchers openly point out the flaws in their own work? Doesn't that weaken their conclusions?
It might seem that way initially, but experienced researchers understand it's the opposite. Transparently acknowledging limitations is a sign of intellectual honesty and critical self-awareness. It shows you understand the boundaries of your own findings.
So, admitting your sample size was small, or maybe skewed towards a certain demographic, or that your measurement tool had limitations, that's actually a strength.
It absolutely is. It tells the reader, here's what we found, and here are the specific conditions under which we found it. Be cautious about generalizing too broadly. It also guides future research by highlighting areas needing improvement. It contextualizes the findings properly. A good discussion section always addresses limitations.
Okay, that makes sense. So the paper is written, limitations noted. Now it enters the formal academic quality control system, peer review.
The gold standard. Peer review is the formal process where a submitted piece of academic work, an article for a journal, a grant proposal, is evaluated by other experts, peers, working in the very same specific field.
And the goal is to ensure quality before publication or funding.
Exactly. Peers assess the originality, the significance, the soundness of the methodology, the validity of the results, and the clarity of the writing.
How do they try to keep it objective? The reviewer might know the author or have competing research.
Good systems try to mitigate bias. Often it's a blind review process. In single blind, the reviewers know who the author is, but the author doesn't know who the reviewers are. In double blind, neither knows the other's identity. The aim is to focus the critique purely on the quality of the work itself, not on reputation or personal factors.
Makes sense. And assuming the work passes peer review and gets published, the final step is getting it out there. Dissemination.
Dissemination is simply the act of spreading that information, that knowledge, widely and effectively, making the verified findings accessible to the relevant community.
Traditionally, that meant publishing in those peer-reviewed journals and presenting at scholarly conferences.
Those are still core channels, but dissemination is changing rapidly now with digital technology. Online journals, open access repositories, even preprint servers where researchers share findings before formal peer review.
It's all accelerating the spread of information.
Dramatically. It speeds up the whole cycle of discussion, critique, replication, and building upon new findings. Distribution, propagation, similar ideas about getting the knowledge circulated.
Wow. Okay, we have really covered the entire life cycle, haven't we?
Yeah.
From the initial preliminary spark through defining methodology and parameters, the experimental work with its apparatus and maybe self-reports, dealing with correlation versus causation, the crucial steps of verification and peer review, all the way to the final dissemination of a formal treatise or paper.
It's a dense landscape of terms, no doubt. But internalizing them, really understanding what they signify, like the rigor behind empirical data, the rationale and methodology, the caution needed with correlation, the importance of acknowledging limitations, it genuinely elevates your ability to engage.
It moves you beyond just comprehension to actual critical participation at that advanced professional level.
Exactly. And maybe the single most valuable skill you gain from mastering this lexicon, especially navigating today's information overload.
It's being able to tell the difference between a genuinely verifiable finding backed by solid evidence and rigorous methods and something that just sounds scientific but is actually closer to pseudoscience.
That's the core takeaway. That critical filter becomes incredibly sharp.
And building on that, our final thought for you today. Understanding the limitations of even the best, most rigorous science is just as crucial as knowing the findings themselves.
Absolutely. That awareness stops you from being just a passive receiver of information and turns you into an active, critical, informed user of knowledge. You're equipped to question, to contextualize, to understand the boundaries of certainty. Great research starts with curiosity, yes, but it's always shaped and tempered by the kind of rigorous approach and precise language we've explored today.